Okay, so this is some output that I got from Google AI, which I'm not sure if that's called Gemini or not, and also from Grok 3. I got a very short, brief output from Google AI, and then I switched over to Grok 3 to get more in depth information. So, this is about um, the alleged suicide of Emperor Nero, and one of the one of the things that the scholarly consensus, as revealed by Grok 3, was that Nero probably left Rome because of the Damnatio Memoriae, um, the condemnation or damnation of his memory. Uh, so I decided to look into this Damnatio Memoriae. We've already looked at the surprising lack of historical evidence for Nero's or the received narrative of Nero's demise, and the narrative about the disposition of his remains. There's some pretty big holes there. Um, Tacitus, in his annals, is not that portion where we should be getting information about Nero's demise and the disposition of his remains. That part of his annals is missing. And he's the one who was actually a thinking, um, young person when these events are supposed to have happened. So most of the testimony really rests upon what Suetonius reports, but Suetonius was born a year after Nero's alleged self-deletion. And then Cassius Dio, the third source that's cited, he's not even a contemporary. He's so far removed from the events that I don't think there's any reason we even have to consider him. Anything he reports is just going to be based on the earlier historians, although, you know, we get this idea that there are these massive warehouses of Roman records written on, uh, I don't know what, parchment, papyri, um, that that are preserving all of these details in a place where um, the buildings didn't even have windows. They were more like open porches. I'm surprised people were even able to survive being exposed to the elements like that, but maybe the weather in the Mediterranean is more mild. I don't know. Anyway, so what Google AI says about damnatio memoriae is that it's a Latin phrase that means condemnation of memory. It refers to the act of erasing a person from public memory, often as punishment for political failure or corruption. And make sure this is recording, yes. How it was used in ancient Rome. The Romans used damnatio memoriae to erase former leaders from public memory. This was done by defacing images, removing heads from statues, and chiseling names off of inscriptions. So, the image of Nero, if damnatio memoriae was carried out, They would have worked to deface his image. So you could either take that as a literal um, three-dimensional sculpture, I suppose, maybe what do they call it, a bas relief, um, or how about just uh, his received image, that is the image that people had of him in their minds based on the public perception, right? So there could have been an effort there to deface his image in the people's minds. In other words, to deface his reputation or his history. Um, Another method used was removing heads from statues. Now that it's interesting to point that out when at the same time Caligula is supposed to have removed the heads of different gods and put his own head there. And let me see here. Let's see. He had been named after Gaius Julius Caesar. So, was he a Julio Claudian then? Looks like he might have been. And Caligula succeeded him as emperor around 37. So, I'm pretty sure that makes him. His successor was Claudius. Spouses, let's see. Julia Drusilla was one of his children. Dynasty, Julio-Claudian. So it's possible that Caligula's reputation was assassinated by the historians under the Roman Flavian dynasty, just like Nero's was, just because he was part of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. But although I think some of what Caligula did led up to the turmoil that boiled up into the Roman war against the Jews, I don't really see Caligula as a central figure in the events that resulted in the destruction of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem and the invention of Christianity. So while I could take some time to investigate how historical the accusations against Caligula are, it's not something I feel invested in, right? I'm not a historian. I'm someone who's investigating a very specific period of time, and I'm doing it because, one, I used to be a Christian. Two, I've observed how our post-Christian Western society is still biased against the Jewish voice and perspective. I myself am not Jewish. I did want to become Jewish at one time, but eventually I concluded that, at least at this time, and it's still the case, at least at the time I reached the conclusion, and it's still the case today, I concluded that I just didn't have the personal discipline to be a good convert to Orthodox Judaism. And part of that is, I think, because I wasn't raised up in it. It's not something that is, I don't want to say second nature. It's not something that's first nature for me. So, anyway, but I do, um, I was raised up by my father to value truth and to hate falsehoods and to have a sense of justice uh, where people shouldn't be bullied by um, a greater amount of power, I guess you could say. Right? Just because someone is more mighty, they shouldn't bully someone else, especially if that someone else is in the right. They definitely shouldn't be bullied by those who are in the wrong. And that's pretty much what's been done to the Jewish people since the Romans destroyed the temple in Jerusalem. They went and created this baloney paganistic religion, Christianity, to demonize and stigmatize the Jewish people and to continue to wage a propaganda war against them, when really Judaism was a um, kind of an, you could say, kind of an isolationist or insulated uh, religion or culture or people um, who, I'm not sure to what extent they accepted actual converts rather than people, Gentiles, who went and just decided to convert themselves and pass themselves off as Jewish. Um, but uh, it appears that people who sympathized with the monotheism of Judaism had to, or felt compelled to, make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. So Judaism wasn't a religion that was like Islam, uh, didn't have a recipe to dominate the world, to take over the world. And really, that's the recipe of Sharia law, because Sharia law says that any land that was once under Islamic law must be redeemed, rescued from the infidels and unbelievers, and brought back under Islamic law. So, like the arcade game Kicks, that's a strategy that doesn't ever give up any ground. It only takes more and more ground, or sees ground that it has lost to non Islamic peoples to be forever their property, and to be something that needs to be taken back. Whereas Judaism in the Torah clearly delineates the extent of the territorial uh, inheritance or heritage of the various tribes of Israel, and thus of Israel as a whole. And like, you don't see any place in the Torah where it says that Florida is part of um, biblical Israel, or that Canada is part of biblical Israel, or that Singapore is part of biblical Israel. It's clearly delineated, and you don't see that anywhere in the Hebrew Tanakh where Jews are trying to um, take some distant land and make it a colony of Israel. That's just not happening. So, whereas Jews are accused of this conspiracy or scheme to dominate the world, that's not really backed up by their fundamental cultural literature. Um, in fact, if you study Noahide law, the laws that are incumbent upon non-Jews, it is for non-Jews to establish their courts of justice in their lands. If a like some sort of Jewish ambassador were to come and do that, that would be insulting to those people. And uh, devotion to the Creator obviously is best demonstrated in a voluntary way rather than through compulsion. And even though Islam says true religion isn't by compulsion, whenever Islam gets a certain percentage, let's say an indeterminate percentage of the demographics of an area, then they begin to flex their muscles and bully the natives in that land and expand Islam there. So, yeah, today when you're a minority, according to Islam, true religion isn't by compulsion, but when they begin to get greater numbers in whatever land they're in, then religion becomes by compulsion. Of course, you always have the freedom to die if you want to. I guess there's that. So, Jews, for the last 2,000 years roughly, haven't been getting a fair shake. So, that's my motivation for why we have to demonstrate the validity of the Jewish voice and perspective and show that what's so easily accepted as historical truth by the anti-Jewish biased scholarly consensus, we have to show that there's some big holes in their received narratives, and that the standards that they apply to the Jewish voice and perspective, they don't apply to themselves, which is the typical Gentile double standard that's applied to the Jewish people. So, let's continue. And then finally, another way of carrying out Damnatio Memoriae is to chisel the names off of inscriptions. I think the Egyptians also did this. The pharaohs would try to take credit from another pharaoh by chiseling off their predecessor's name and chiseling in their own name there. You see this during campaigning in the U.S., during the campaigning preceding the presidential election. one one politician can do some good work, and then the politician campaigning against them will not even confess to their opponents having accomplished something good, and will instead chisel in their own name and then try to take credit for the good work that the other candidate had already accomplished. So I mean that's the height of audacity, to sit there and try to chisel out your opponent's name while they're still alive. But it doesn't stop them. Let's see. For example, Tiberius had coins minted during Sejanus's consulship defaced by removing Sejanus's name. That must have taken some effort. How many coins were out there? How many were minted? He also had statues of Sejanus pulled down, including one in the theater of Pompeii. Examples of Damnatio Memoriae. The pharaoh Hatshepsut, his name was erased from the king list. The brother of the Roman Emperor Caracalla, by the name of Geta, was erased from history after Caracalla murdered him. And I might be pronouncing that incorrectly, but whatever. So then I asked Grok 3 about Damnatio Memoriae. I said, please share with me the laws and restrictions of Damnatio Memoriae and how it was applied in the ancient Roman Empire. Key points. Research suggests Damnatio Memoriae was a practice in ancient Rome to erase the memory of traitors, often after death, with no single codified law. It seems likely that the Senate or Emperor decided on this, involving destroying statues, erasing names, and sometimes nullifying laws. The evidence leans toward it being applied to those convicted of treason, with actions varying by status and context. Overview. Damnatio Memoriae, meaning condemnation of memory, was a way ancient Romans dealt with individuals seen as enemies of the state, like traitors. It wasn't a formal law. Now, to apply this to the Emperor Nero, if Nero converted to Judaism and unasked the AO, left Rome and went to Jerusalem, then I'm pretty sure he would have been seen as a traitor if he had done that. It wasn't a formal law, but a custom, usually decided by the Senate. So now, let me remind you that Grok 3 told us, based on the scholarly consensus extracted from all of the historical detection or historical scholarship surrounding these events, that it has at its disposal, right? It's not, if scholars hadn't even considered the possibility that Nero really converted to Judaism, then there's not going to be a whole lot of publications out there for Grok 3 to peruse or to scan or to analyze in order to even consider the question, right? So it's basically working with a scholarly consensus that says that the Talmud's report that Nero converted to Judaism is just legendary, and it's based on that assassination of character of the Jewish perspective and voice, that it wasn't without a lot of pressing that Grok 3 could in any measure conclude that Flavius Josephus informs us of Nero's conversion to Judaism when he reports that Nero reigned for 13 years and 8 days, which are the two measurements of time that are found in the chapter in Genesis on the Abrahamic covenant, which includes circumcision, which is the ritual performed when a person, a man specifically, converts to Judaism. And those two lengths of time are not found together anywhere else in the whole Hebrew Tanakh. So that would be a tremendous coincidence. And to suggest that 8 days was a rounding of 7 months and 27 days, which is supposedly the the accurate, exact report of Nero's reign is just wrong. It's just obviously it's just someone's theory to explain why Flavius Josephus didn't get the report exact. But in rabbinical hermeneutics, in rabbinical rules of interpretation, if you expect someone to say one thing and instead they say another thing, then you need to analyze what is being said by their saying the unexpected thing. Now, I didn't even go that far because I didn't know that the report of 13 years and 8 days wasn't accurate. Instead, my question at the time, because I'd already gotten into the habit of reading ancient sources critically, I simply asked myself, who cares about 8 days? Why are you boring me with this detail? Well, Jews care about 8 days. So then somehow I made the connection that 13 years and 8 days, those are both figures found in, I believe it's Genesis 17. I would have to go back and look again. Some things I memorized at one time, and then my brain just lets loose of them in my old age, I guess. But, we could check it right now, even though I've probably already covered it in another video. 17. Yeah, Abraham and the covenant of circumcision is Genesis 17. So, alright, so this practice of Damnatio Memoriae aimed to erase the person's memory by destroying their statues, removing their names from records. Okay, so on the one hand, the scholarly consensus tells us that Nero's name would have been removed from records if Damnatio Memoriae was carried out against him, yet at the same time it tells us that historians like Suetonius and Cassius Dio, who were not contemporaneous with Nero, would have consulted those records in order to arrive at the history they provide regarding the details of Nero's alleged death and the disposition of his remains. So they're trying to have it both ways, But then I think elsewhere it'll say, oh, but they won't destroy all of the records. They'll maintain some of the records. And another practice is even voiding their laws or decisions, which we in America, with this two-party political system, we've gotten pretty accustomed to seeing that. Anytime the administration changes from Republican to Democrat or Democrat to Republican, this happens. Their laws and decisions are getting voided. It makes you wonder how any nation could even trust America when we've got this bipolar political system. The specifics could change depending on who is involved and the political situation, making it a flexible but powerful tool. Historical context. This practice was common for figures like hated emperors or senators, with examples including Sejanus and Gnaeus Calpurnius Piso, which there's another theory about the invention of Christianity, I think, and it's called the Piso theory. Personally, I don't place as much credence on it, and I admit that I'm also not as versed in it as I do the Caesar's Messiah thesis. The Caesar's Messiah thesis is so easy. It makes such easy sense. Um, what is it? Occam's razor. I saw the Lisa from The Simpsons say something about Occam's razor recently. It's a problem-solving principle that states the simplest explanation is usually the best. Now, some people would say that the simplest explanation for Christianity would be that everything reported in the Christian scriptures is the simplest explanation, and therefore it's it's the best explanation. And at the same time as saying best, you're also saying the most likely true explanation. But the thing is, the Christian scriptures are filled with some rather spectacular, sensational, even fantastic pictures of events, claims of miracles, and so forth. And probably the biggest one is that Jesus is supposed to be the eschatological Messiah, but he's not here now, hasn't been here for a while, has been expected to come back, but hasn't, and the world goes on as if Christianity didn't accomplish anything. Because we still have war, we still have sin, we still have crime, we still have widespread ignorance and violation of the Torah. I mean, if Christianity had not come along, one wonders if the world would be pretty much the same as it is now. Now, granted, Christianity teaches some moral principles, but it's also, in whatever form it currently takes, it's also influenced by philosophies and even other religions, whether ancient or modern, and even politics. It's influenced by politics. So a lot of the morality of all of these many influences could have just as well shaped the world. Um, but yeah, it's just certainly Christianity has had an influence on the world, on the Western world, but it didn't make the big splash that it's supposed to have. Speaking from an uh, eschatological standpoint, right? And while a person can say, well, like the end hasn't come, so then why would we expect the eschatological events to happen? I could counter with, maybe you shouldn't believe in eschatology because the end hasn't come. It didn't come when it was expected in the first century. It didn't come when it was expected in 1000 AD. It didn't come in 2000 AD, and so forth. All of the many dates that have been proposed have come and went. So why believe in it? Um, Scientists, especially astronomers, and maybe those who specialize in physics, they'll tell you about impending events on a cosmic scale uh, that are supposed to happen in the neighborhood of our solar system eventually, after such long periods of time that we won't be around, at least in our present forms, to see these cataclysmic events which very well could end the world as we know it. Um, we won't be around to see those happen. So, yes, you could say that there is a probable eventuality to the end of the world as we know it, but it didn't happen. It didn't happen in the way that it was expected to happen in the first century, and it hasn't happened that way in the 2,000 years after that. So, at some point, you've got to stop being that naive little girl waiting for her date to show up when she's been stood up, and especially not be that naive little girl who keeps getting pranked or punked over and over again and keeps getting stood up by the same guy over and over again. You know, she dresses nice, puts on her makeup, maybe spritz on some perfume, and generally readies herself almost like a bride for her groom, but then the groom keeps leaving her standing at the altar. I mean, eventually you really should have some self-respect, some self-esteem, and realize that you've either A, been hoodwinked, and or B, you've hoodwinked yourself. Because it's possible for individuals to engage in self-deception. Um, yeah, the whole thing about the eschatological Messiah is that it's looking for a final end-all and be-all Messiah, when the term Messiah is really kind of a more commonplace term in the Hebrew Tanakh, what some call the Old Testament. It applied to kings of Israel, multiple kings of Israel, multiple high priests of Israel, and it was even applied to Cyrus the Great of Persia, a non-Israelite. So, you know, this is not a term that's just applied to one last person, unless the context of that specific work of literature is speaking about a Messiah in that way. But I would say that given the way the term is used in the Hebrew Tanakh, excuse me, one should take another look at those sources and make sure that it's not using the term in the way it's used throughout the rest of the Tanakh. Because Judaism is not a religion that's about doing good deeds today so that you can go to heaven tomorrow. It's about doing those good deeds because they are good and wise counsel, but also because the King of the universe commanded you to do them. He instructed you to do them. So it's not because you're looking for a reward. It's because although traditional Judaism does see that there is a reward, but what the extent of that reward is for any given good deed, I'm not sure that it's itemized in that way. So you wouldn't say, well, I'm going to do this good deed in order that maybe I could be a mother of 6 children. You might, that would be a little presumptuous to set the limits of the or the extent of the reward in exchange for doing a single good deed when you've been commanded to do much more than just a single good deed. So really Judaism is a day after day lifestyle. It's not something that seeks to get martyred or to burn up like the filament in a bulb. Uh, it's not something that looks forward to the horrific events that would proceed or happen during the transformation of the world into a messianic era. These are people with family, with children who value the lives of the members of their community, but I'm sure even more their own family members. So they're not rushing headlong into some kind of apocalyptic scenario where they're hoping to get raptured up into the sky, or they're not seeking to end their lives today so that they can be resurrected tomorrow or in 3 days. So, again, I've gone off on a tangent, but I'm trying to explain like some of the perspective behind what's going on here. So this practice was common for figures like hated emperors or senators, with examples including Sejanus and Gnaeus Calpurnius Piso. It wasn't just about punishment, it was a public statement often tied to political shifts, like after an emperor's death. While it tried to erase someone completely, it wasn't always successful, as history still remembers many of these figures. Unexpected detail. Interestingly, it wasn't just about erasing memory. Sometimes statues were reworked to show new leaders, showing a practical side to save resources like reusing expensive materials. So, likewise, the image of a person might be reworked in order to alter it in a way that's useful to those currently in power. Survey note: detailed examination of Damnatio Memoriae in ancient Rome. Damnatio Memoriae, a Latin phrase translating to condemnation of memory or damnation of memory, represents a fascinating aspect of ancient Roman political and cultural practices. This survey note aims to provide a comprehensive analysis of the laws, restrictions and application of Damnatio Memoriae within the Roman Empire, drawing from historical records and scholarly interpretations. It encompasses all details from the initial inquiry, ensuring a thorough understanding for readers interested in the nuances of Roman governance and societal norms. Historical background and definition. Damnatio Memoriae was not a term used by the Romans themselves, but is a modern construction to describe their practice of erasing individuals from official records and public memory. It was typically applied posthumously to figures deemed traitors or enemies of the state, particularly those convicted of crimen majestatis. Crimen majestatis, or something like that. I flunked Latin primarily because I dropped out of high school and about a year later joined the army. So I did eventually somewhat live that down by getting an associate's degree, but majoring mostly in education, general education. So this was typically applied posthumously to figures deemed traitors or enemies of the state, particularly those convicted of crimen majestatis or treason. So in Nero's case, we can't say that Damnatio Memoriae would have been what prompted him to flee to this villa in the outskirts of Rome or the suburbs of Rome where he allegedly self-deleted. Right? So there's another hole there. However, possibly those convicted of treason, if Nero was really convicted of treason, that may have prompted him to flee to the villa. But I think when we analyze all this, what we see is that it's really just a result, his fleeing is really just a result of the political turmoil and of the public sentiment which was turning against him. Again, all this is testified by historians who either have holes in their histories or weren't contemporaneous to these events, and were biased by the Roman Flavian dynasty and its interests. This practice aimed to cancel every trace of the condemned, preserving the honor of Rome by symbolically removing their existence from history. Evidence suggests it was seen as early as the Egyptian New Kingdom, but in Rome it became prominent during the Republic and imperial records, especially for emperors and high-ranking officials. So, preserving the honor of Rome. So, this practice aimed to cancel every trace of the condemned. So, if Nero did convert to Judaism, then this practice would have sought to cancel every trace of his existence after his departure from Rome. So how do you do that? Well, then you say that the person, you have to say that the person died, right? Unless you're going to say he got like caught up to heaven or something. A motivation for doing this is to preserve the honor of Rome. So if Nero converted to Judaism and left Rome for Jerusalem, then it may have been necessary to share this shameful report about uh, Nero's allegedly ignominious or shameful last moments in order to preserve the honor of Rome. Because if you admit that your emperor converted to the religion of some foreigners that you didn't, well, you certainly didn't see as equal to or superior to yourselves, and that he left leading Rome to go to Jerusalem and possibly lead Jews there in Jerusalem, then that would have been shameful to Rome, because it's like you're a wife and your husband leaves you for another woman. That makes you look bad. It makes you look like there's something not quite as good as the woman that your husband left you for. And then part of this practice is symbolically removing their existence from history. So we don't get any history of Nero after his alleged death. Of course, that could be explained by his actual death, or it could be explained by the practice of Damnatio Memoriae. Evidence suggests it was seen as early as the Egyptian New Kingdom, but in Rome it became prominent during the Republic and Imperial periods, especially for emperors and high-ranking officials. The process was not merely vandalism, but a formal sanction, often requiring Senate approval. See, now this one says that, right? Often requiring Senate approval, but then elsewhere it says that there's no real Senate like pronouncement or edict or law. I think maybe it's in the next sentence here. Often requiring Senate approval, reflecting its legal and political dimensions. However, the lack of a single codified law meant its application could vary, influenced by political expediency and economic considerations, such as the cost of destroying statues made from precious materials. The legal basis for Damnatio Memoriae was tied to the crime of crimen majestatis, defined as acts against the Roman people or their safety, encompassing treasonous activities like raising armies without imperial command or questioning the emperor's successor. So that leads us to an idea. Like, if Nero had been seen as a messianic figure when he converted to Judaism, and by the way, I think it might have been Rabbi Meir who is supposed to have descended from Nero. Anyway, at least one of the great rabbis or sages, I think, was a convert to Judaism. So it's not unheard of that a convert might take up such a position of honor in the Judaism of that time. But it makes you wonder, is it possible that if Nero was seen as a messianic figure in Jerusalem, and that in doing so, he was raising up an army out of a foreign people that was within the Roman Empire, then maybe that could have been a reason that he would have been tied to the crime of treason. Let's see. Or here, another possible offense is questioning the emperor's successor. So, who is an antichrist? He who denies that Jesus is the Christ or the Messiah, the Son of God come in the flesh, right? So, if Nero had just surrendered his imperial throne and took up a Jewish perspective, then he may have been seen as questioning the emperor's successor, or questioning his own successor. Ordinarily, you wouldn't have to worry about your successor questioning your authority in the Roman imperial system, right? Sometimes because you would make sure to kill them off. Well, there was no specific statute named Damnatio Memoriae, so again, it could not be the reason that Nero had to flee to the villa. It was a consequence of convictions under existing treason laws enforced through Senate decrees or imperial orders. So any mention of Damnatio Memoriae is something that would have been carried out after Nero's alleged self-deletion or his conversion to Judaism. So we can't take it as the reason that he fled to the villa. It would be the accusation of treason, but I think that as we continue to look even at that, we find out that that kind of dissolves as the explanation also, and then ultimately it seems like Grok 3 decides that it was really just because of political turmoil and public sentiment turning against Nero, which would have been the results if he had converted to Judaism. The restrictions on its application were primarily contextual. It was typically reserved for high-profile figures such as senators and emperors whose actions were seen as hostile to the state. Now, some people try to, I think, tie in Nero's playing the fiddle while Rome burned and how the Christians were blamed for that. But I think that fire in Rome was supposed to have happened like 4 years before Nero's alleged suicide. Fire in Rome during Nero's reign happened when? Yeah, 64 AD. So that's like 4 years before Nero's alleged self-deletion. So can we really say it took 4 years for them to level an accusation of treason if it was tied to the fire in Rome? It says the Senate's approval was often required, though the emperor could veto or override, as seen when Claudius prevented Caligula's damnatio. Economic incentives like seizing property or reworking statues sometimes complicated its official execution, suggesting it was rare and not always fully implemented. Examples of Damnatio Memoriae cases and legal basis. In the case of Caligula, It was disputed, possibly by Senate decree, or legal basis may have been by Senate decree. Property was seized, statues defaced. In the case of Nero, hostis judicatio, treason trial. When was that trial? Name erased, laws nullified, and then it goes on to others that Domitian was Titus's, the last of the Flavian dynastic line, and that was by per Senate decree, statues destroyed, name removed. In the case of Nero, name was erased, laws nullified. I'd like to know more about that treason trial. In fact, let's look at that right now. So, when was and what are the details surrounding the hostis judicatio against the Emperor Nero? 20 web pages, oh boy. Okay, so Nero was supposed to have committed self-deletion in June of AD 68. Here it says, the declaration of someone as hostis publicus, or public enemy, against Emperor Nero occurred in June AD 68, making a pivotal moment in his downfall and the end of his reign as the fifth Roman emperor. This formal pronouncement by the Roman Senate was a rare and extreme measure, reflecting the collapse of Nero's authority amid widespread rebellion and political chaos. So there was already widespread rebellion and political chaos, or was it resulting from the declaration of him as a public enemy? See, in this business about the persecution of Christians following the Great Fire of Rome in AD 64, that would have not caused the political turmoil, because Christianity, especially at that time, would not have been popular enough that anyone would have given a damn, right? That's basically retro fitted history. It's revised history. And if you know the Caesar's Messiah thesis, then you know Christianity didn't even exist in AD 64. It's absolute nonsense. Whether these accounts are fully accurate or exaggerated by hostile later sources, at least it acknowledges that these were hostile later sources. Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio remains debated, but they fueled growing discontent among the Roman elite and populace. Yeah, see, here it even questions whether these accounts are fully exaggerated, or fully accurate or exaggerated. By AD 68, Nero's grip on power had weakened significantly. The empire faced mounting unrest, including revolts in the provinces and dissatisfaction among the military and aristocracy. The tipping point came with the rebellion of Gaius Julius Vindex, the governor of Gallia Lugdunensis, modern France, in March AD 68. Vindex denounced Nero's tyranny and rallied support to overthrow him, aligning himself with Servius Sulpicius Galba, the governor of Hispania Tarraconensis, and a respected military figure. Although Vindex's forces were defeated by loyalist troops under Lucius Verginius Rufus in May AD 68, the rebellion exposed Nero's vulnerability and emboldened further opposition. As the revolt spread, Nero's support crumbled. The Praetorian Guard, once Praetorian Guard, even Praetorian Guard, I guess, once loyal to him due to his early generosity, including bribes arranged by Burrus, began to waver. In early June AD 68, Galba declared himself a contender for the throne, gaining traction among senators and soldiers. The Senate, sensing the shifting tide and eager to align with a new power, took decisive action. On or around June 8th to 9th AD 68, they formally declared Nero a public enemy of the state, stripping him of imperial authority and condemning him to death in absentia. So he was already absent, right? And that's in June 8th to 9th when he's supposed to have self-deleted. So he was already absent. In absentia, in the absence, a legal term in Latin for in the absence or while absent. Declared death in absentia, or simply death in absentia, legally declared death without a body, which I submit is probably the case with Nero. This declaration was not merely symbolic, it legally justified his removal and sanctioned his execution by traditional means, such as being beaten to death with rods. Sanctioned his execution by traditional means. So, if Nero had to be executed by traditional means, then that may be one reason then that Nero, as the convert Simon Bar Giora, one of the Jewish resistance fighters who was captured by Titus and then carted back to Rome for execution, which you gotta really wonder, would they have really bothered to do that with just any Jewish resistance fighter, or would they have executed him right there militarily? However, if Simon was Nero converted to Judaism, then we see that a reason for them to take Nero in the person of Simon back to Rome to be executed there. And that's where we get the church tradition that Simon Peter was executed upside down in Rome. Crucifixion upside down, I think, is the tradition. And I'm not sure, but I think that comes from the Acts of Paul and Thecla. I could be wrong. It's been a while. Anyway, and in fact, the whole crucifixion upside down thing, it makes you wonder if that's a literary device telling you that maybe no, he wasn't even really executed. You know, like if you take a crucifixion and you invert it, maybe you're saying that really the opposite is true, that he wasn't really crucified, but that maybe he wasn't crucified at all. I don't know. That would be like that would symbolize that an inversion of the truth was going on. But, and of course, that would give rise to rumors that Nero would return as a tyrant. But anyway, um, that's all. That's all speculation. These aren't hills I would die on. That's just me playing around with what's been handed down to us to try to get at the real truth of the matter, because there's some big holes in this scholarly consensus. Um, so, and the reason I lean more towards the Jewish perspective on the matter is because, like Robert Eisenman said, when someone reports something to you that just flies in the face of the received narrative, you need to sit up and take notice and really look at it. And that's what I did when the local Orthodox rabbi told me that Nero had converted to Judaism, because nobody is saying that. You know, no reference that you read will tell you that, right? And we've seen that if there are any that even mention the Jewish report on the matter, they just explain it away as legendary. So if the report is true that Nero converted to Judaism, then that alone reveals that we are living with an academic community that has an anti-Jewish bias, and that whose own history is filled with holes and deceptive and filled with disinformation, or at the very least misinformation. And why should that concern us? Well, because like Western society is a product really of these key events in the first century, at least the way I see it, because you had this monotheistic religion that existed within the Roman Empire, and it was just kind of doing its own thing as its own community, limited to one geographical area. But then it had supporters or people who were sympathetic or interested in Judaism making pilgrimage to Jerusalem from other parts of the known world, so that there was a certain amount of popularity for the religion. And then, for some reason, the Roman Empire decided to provoke the Jews to war and to destroy this religious edifice where all these Gentiles were making pilgrimage to it. And then they created a religion, a counterfeit Judaism, to replace Judaism as it existed at that time, unless the Judaism that was allowed to continue establishing an academy at Jamnia or Jaffa, I think under Hadrian, Um, unless that supposedly kinder, gentler Judaism was really just the same Judaism that the Pharisees were um, teaching in the first century before the destruction of the temple. But but it's clear that what we find in the Christian addendum, that's my name for the so-called New Testament, um, we find that it does teach some things that are contrary to the Torah. Um, one of the biggest being that we should worship a mere man as God, uh, at least if you believe that there are any evidences for the uh, whether Trinity doctrine or Binity doctrine in the New Testament. Um, I mean that's just against the Torah to worship a mere man as God. So, and then the anti-Torah bias in the Christian scriptures would be another thing. It's clear that Christianity um, was really tailored for non-Jewish masses in the empire uh, because it wound up being more popular than Judaism. Of course, if Joseph Atwill Caesar's Messiah thesis is correct, then Christianity really had um, the distribution of the imperial authorities. So it could be spread throughout the empire. And it would be seeking to poach the those who were sympathetic to Judaism, who would no longer be making a pilgrimage to Jerusalem because the court of the Gentiles in the temple in Jerusalem was no longer standing in its pristine form. Let's see. The term hostis judicatio stems from the Senate's act of judicare hostes, judging as enemies, a practice first formalized in 88 BCE during Sulla's civil war, but adapted here to target an emperor. Unlike earlier uses, which often lacked immediate legal consequences, Nero's designation of as a public enemy carried dire implications due to the collapse of his regime. The Senate's move was likely coordinated with Galba's supporters, signaling their acceptance of him as the new emperor. Of course, all of this could have happened after Nero converted to Judaism and went to Jerusalem. Nero's flight and death. Abandoned by his guards, courtiers, and even the Praetorians, who reportedly pledged allegiance to Galba after being promised financial rewards, Nero fled Rome in a desperate bid to escape. He sought refuge at a freedman's villa. See, that's just dumb. That's just a dumb narrative. So he fled Rome in a desperate bid to escape, yet then he commits self-deletion at this villa. He sought refuge at a freedman's villa a few miles outside the city. That's just that few miles outside the city. That's just so that we can put him somewhere where there were no eyewitnesses. Accompanied by a handful of loyalists, including his secretary Epaphroditus, a figure, by the way, mentioned in the New Testament. As pursuers closed in, Nero learned of the Senate's decree and realized his fate was sealed. On June 9th, AD 68. So then you go ahead and self-delete. Out of fear of being executed when you could just go ahead and let yourself be executed. like actually man up, and that would even give you a chance to, speak some closing words to the people, right? And you're like, because you're afraid of the pain that you might endure during the execution. It's not going to last forever, you know. If the eventuality is death, it's not going to last forever. So, um, so rather than face capture and execution, he chose self-deletion. Really? I'm saying self-deletion because, um, YouTube doesn't apparently like the word suicide. With assistance from Epaphroditus, he stabbed himself in the throat, reportedly lamenting Quolis artifex pareo, what an artist dies in me. So I'm not sure if Suetonius got that um, from Epaphroditus directly. His death at age 30 ended the Julio-Claudian dynasty and sparked the chaotic year of the four emperors. So, if Epaphroditus continued living, and then Epaphroditus was the source of these events, then Epaphroditus could have faked Nero's death. Uh, and then that gets into, well, what were the remains? Was it Nero's body, or was it his ashes? What was deposited in the Pincian Hill? Was it a body, or was it his ashes? If it was ashes, then that would have been uh, much more difficult to identify. And also, then, if that makes you wonder, then, if Epaphroditus then might have been the source of the rumors that Nero would return. For example, if someone somehow deduced from conversation with Epaphroditus, either through overt confession or by micro expressions or tells, that there was something wrong with the narrative of Nero's last moments, just by reading Epaphroditus's face. Um, we don't know. Um, Aftermath and significance. The hostis judicatio against Nero was a rare instance of the Senate asserting authority over an emperor, reflecting the extraordinary circumstances of his fall. Following his death, efforts were made to erase his legacy. His name was scraped from monuments and his statues were defaced or repurposed, a process known as Damnatio Memoriae. However, this was not universally enforced, as some lower classes reportedly mourned him, perhaps due to his populist tendencies or relief efforts after the Great Fire. This declaration underscored the fragility of imperial power when it lacked military and senatorial support. It also set a precedent for the Senate's role in legitimizing regime changes, though its authority waned in subsequent centuries. Nero's vilification in historical records, amplified by Flavian propaganda under Galba's successors, cemented his infamous reputation, though modern scholars question whether this reflects reality or a deliberate smear campaign. Nero's vilification in historical records, again, with those, primarily with Suetonius, and then Suetonius wasn't even contemporaneous to these events. Amplified by Flavian propaganda under Galba's successors. It cemented his infamous reputation, though modern scholars question whether this reflects reality or a deliberate smear campaign. In summary, the hostis judicatio against Nero in June AD 68 was a climactic response to his tyrannical rule and the rebellions it provoked, culminating in his flight, suicide, and the end of his dynasty on June 9th, AD 68. It remains a stark example of Rome's political machinery, what is that word? Turning against its own ruler in a time of crisis. So then we'd have to get more into the reasons that Rome's political machinery turned against its ruler. Some reasons are given here, but it makes you wonder if conversion to Judaism, or even just leaving the imperial throne, might have been the reason. Because all of this history comes, well after these events. So, this table highlights the variability in legal basis, with some cases relying on Senate decrees and others on imperial action, illustrating the lack of standardization of Damnatio Memoriae. Process and application. The process of enacting Damnatio Memoriae involves several steps, often detailed in specific Senate decrees, like the Senatus Consultum. I don't know what de something Pison Patre, Fathers of Piso. I don't know. 20 AD, for example, or for instance, after Gnaeus Calpurnius Piso was convicted of treason and ordered to commit suicide, the Senate decree specified no mourning by women, destruction of private and public images, removal of Piso's name from the Germanicus monument base, and confiscation of property. These measures were not uniform, but adapted to the individual's status. For emperors, it could include nullifying their laws, as seen with Nero, while for senators like Piso, so maybe there's a motive right there. Maybe there were certain laws that Nero enacted that the Senate maybe even wanted done away with. While for senators like Piso, it focused on erasing physical representations and public honors. The practice also extended to women, mainly though through association with convicted men, such as Agrippina the Elder and Julia Livilla, with their statues destroyed de facto. The application was not always successful in erasing memory completely, as historical records, like those by Tacitus, preserved details. This accepted Tacitus's annals that covering Nero's end are missing. This partial success was due to the practical limitations, such as the cost of destroying statues and the persistence of private documents like letters and scrolls, which historians today use to reconstruct these figures' lives. Economic and practical considerations. An unexpected aspect was the economic dimension. Destroying statues, especially those made of marble or precious metals, was labor-intensive and costly. Often portraits were recarved to depict successors, as seen with statues of Caligula reworked for Claudius. This pragmatism reflects Roman resourcefulness, balancing political messaging with economic efficiency, and complicates determining when official damnatio occurred, as historians note. So, Statues of Caligula were reworked for Claudius. This pragmatism reflects Roman resourcefulness, balancing political messaging with economic efficiency, and complicates determining when official damnatio occurred, as historians note. Historical examples and impact. Several historical figures underwent Damnatio Memoriae, providing insight into its application. Sejanus in 31 CE, first notable case involved in a conspiracy against Tiberius with statues destroyed and name erased. Nero, 54 to 68 CE, after his suicide, his memory was damned, with coins recalled and laws nullified reflecting public and senatorial hostility. Domitian in 81 to 96, per Senate decree in 96, his images were blurred and decisions ceased, marking a shift in Flavian dynasty politics. So this is another method that could have been used, is that the public's perception or image of Nero could have been blurred through history. These cases illustrate how Damnatio Memoriae was a political tool often used during transitions, like the year of the 4 emperors following Nero, to rewrite legacies and consolidate power. It was not just punishment, but a political spectacle. A public spectacle, transforming honorific commemoration into visible denigration, as scholar Polly Lowe suggests. So, if Nero converted to Judaism, went to Jerusalem, just gave up the imperial throne, if he, wasn't pressured to leave it, then the practice of Damnatio Memoriae could have been carried out to rewrite his legacy in order to consolidate power with the current emperor. It was a public spectacle, so it was necessary to rewrite his legacy for the public. Also to transform honorific commemoration into visible denigration. So a lot of the character assassination, or what could potentially be character assassination taking place in the histories about Nero that were written during the Roman Flavian dynasty, could have aimed to visibly denigrate Nero's image and to rewrite his legacy to consolidate power under the Roman Flavians. Damnatio Memoriae in ancient Rome was a complex practice rooted in treason laws but lacking a standardized legal framework. It was enforced through Senate decrees or imperial orders involving destroying images, erasing names, and sometimes nullifying laws, with actions varying by context. Its restrictions were tied to the crime's severity and the individual's status, with economic and practical considerations shaping its execution. This survey note, drawing from sources like blah 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 blah, you can see them there, provides a detailed examination highlighting its role in Roman political discourse and its lasting historical impact. And then we've got some key citations. So I'm going to stop here because then I ask another question. So I'm just going to put, so I can pick it up from here next time. Alright, so I wanted to cover some information about the practice of Damnatio Memoriae, and to show how it doesn't look like Damnatio Memoriae specifically would have been the reason that Nero would have fled to the villa outside Rome, but rather it's possible that it was the declaration of him as a public enemy that could have prompted that. But then I believe we'll be analyzing that more in detail thanks to Grok 3, but in another part, not in this one. So if you've managed to stay awake through the length of this, so thanks. It's just I try to preserve this output in the way it was provided by Grok 3. I don't want to be accused of tampering with any evidence or lack of evidence that might be here.